Hi, everybody. I'm Vladimir Jutia. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. For the next hour, you and I are going to go through today's top stories. Let's begin. Today is the day President Trump is expected to begin dismantling the Education Department. What we know about the executive order he's signing later this afternoon. And Ukraine. Talking about Ukraine this morning. And in principle, they've agreed to a partial ceasefire with Russia after Volodymyr Zelensky had a talk with President Trump, as did Vladimir Putin. But the details are still unclear, so we're going to talk with the great-granddaughter of former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev about the ongoing effort to end the war. Plus, March Madness tips off today. We're going to take a closer look at the starting matchups and potential bracket busters. Did you guys all submit your brackets? Well, if you didn't, I got you covered. I'm going to share mine. This is CBS News 24/7. But we start this morning with President Trump, who's expected to sign an executive order this afternoon designed to be first steps in dismantling the Department of Education. He has signaled this move for weeks, but he would still need congressional approval to fully shutter this government agency. So I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman. He's joining me now from the White House to talk about this. Willie James, the White House, questions over the president's authority to do this. What are we learning?
Hey there, Vlad. Good to be with you. Well, the White House says that this is about returning the power for education to the states. Now, it's unclear how the different types of funding that the Department of Education takes in will roll out to the states once it's dismantled. But as you pointed out perfectly, the president would need Congress's support to be able to essentially end the Department of Education. This is something that the White House has telegraphed for weeks, as you mentioned as well, but this is the beginning stages, this executive authority to dismantle the Department of Education. Unclear if it will include job cuts as well. Remember, that is something that has already happened with half of the workforce at the Department of Education essentially fired. But the president making this announcement and signing this executive order today at 4 p.m.
Right. So, again, we've been saying this, Willie James, only Congress has the power to fully shutter the agency. So is this performative? I mean, people are certainly going to be laid off. We know that. That's going to be another case where government workers find themselves out of a job. That's not good for the economy. But when we talk about fully closing the Department of Education, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, part of it would require essentially moving different things such as student loans that are handled by the Department of Education, perhaps to the Treasury Department or the Commerce Department. That's not happening today, though. A White House official pointed out that student loans, assistance to school districts for low-income families and individuals with disabilities, those assistance programs will still continue to be handled by the Department of Education. The president isn't eliminating that today. As I mentioned, he will need Congress's buy-in. It's unclear if that'll actually happen with this Congress. This is something that Republicans have eyed that they want to happen, but this is the beginning stages, giving that power to the Education Secretary to begin dismantling the Department of Education as long as she can lawfully do so, different parts of it. But those key programs that a lot of families, millions of families depend on, those programs will still be in place, at least for now, at the Department of Education. Vlad.
All right, Willie James Inman for us at the White House. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Meanwhile, a federal judge is giving the Trump administration until noon to provide documents on those controversial migrant deportation flights to El Salvador that happened over the weekend. In a motion filed by the government yesterday, the Department of Justice says it may evoke the state secrets doctrine to avoid providing the information requested. So I want to bring in CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland for more on this. So Scott, the Justice Department is able to use this state secrets doctrine. It really does feel like they've got lawyers poring over ancient artifacts in the National Archives to come up with ways to continue to carry out these plans.
This is a fight that is supposed to be rectified midday today. The chief judge here in Washington set this deadline for them, the Department of Justice, to answer some point-blank questions about those flights, those deportation flights last Saturday. When did they take off? When did they clear U.S. airspace? When did they land? And Chief Judge James Boasberg wants to know, were his orders to turn the plane around defied? They were supposed to get those answers to the judge yesterday at noon. The judge gave them an extra day as they continued to defy his requests. And it's anybody's guess whether they're going to answer those questions today. You could have more confidence filling out your bracket this morning than betting on whether these answers are going to come, because at this moment, this fight is galvanizing Trump supporters. They are accusing this judge of overreaching, of being a radical, of being a liberal. President Trump has called for the judge's impeachment. And politically, this is an issue the Trump administration likes: their deportation of suspected gang members. But the court orders still stand, and whether they're defied or not could mean an awful lot moving forward.
And you're learning some new information this morning, Scott, from your sources. What can you tell us?
There was a new filing overnight in the U.S. District Court in this case from the attorneys who represent some of the plaintiffs. And the plaintiffs here are a group of Venezuelan nationals who say they are not gang members and should not have been subject to any deportation. They're arguing these deportations were a moment of chaos on the tarmac, on the plane, that there was crying and instability on the flight, that it was putridly hot, that the media was staged outside before this all got going, and that the people involved didn't know what was to happen. They claimed the jails in which they're going to be locked up or have been locked up in Central America are inhumane. We'll see if that filing means anything to the judge, but it's an argument as to why this was done too rashly, too harshly. The Trump administration may not mind these filings, indicating this is how you get treated if you're a suspected gang member. This all has both a political and a legal nexus, Vlad, and we'll see how it unspools over the next few hours.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, Scott, to hear the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, criticizing the judge in this case by claiming the situation is a judicial power grab by an activist judge. But then you've got the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, issuing what some say is a rare rebuke. It's not doesn't have a lot of teeth, but it is something. And I just wonder, all of these individuals are lawyers. It boggles the mind that even the Attorney General doesn't seem to comprehend that if the president is able to defy this judge's orders, then he can defy any judge's orders. Supreme Court, Attorney General, the sky is the limit when it comes to this. Once you defy one, the precedent is set.
That's why this is so critical. This is an inflection point for the next few years. This battle against a single judge could be a proxy for battles against other judges. Vlad, this isn't happening in a vacuum. There have been 140-plus federal lawsuits filed already in the first 2 months against Trump executive orders, and if they can destabilize or diminish the impact of judges, those lawsuits could become less impactful.
Wow. All right, Scott MacFarlane for us in Washington. Scott, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, let's turn now to the escalating situation in the Middle East. Hamas says it fired rockets targeting Tel Aviv this morning in response to what it called the, quote, massacres against civilians in Gaza. It's the first time we've seen rockets fly out of Gaza in months. Now, this comes as Israeli forces have resumed ground operations in the enclave and have escalated airstrikes. Israel says it will not stop the new offensive until all hostages are released. CBS News foreign correspondent Raymond Asensio has more from Tel Aviv.
Yes, Israel's military threatened to unleash hell on Gaza this week, and it is now delivering. At least 58 people were killed in a third night in a row of airstrikes up and down the Strip, taking the death toll to roughly an estimated 500 people since the ceasefire was shattered on Tuesday with Israel's shock pre-dawn missile barrages. Early morning reports came in today of more airstrikes near southern Khan Yunis and Rafah, which is on Egypt's border. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned Gaza to return the hostages and expel Hamas, the alternative being total destruction and devastation. However, collective punishment is a violation of the Geneva Conventions and deemed a war crime. In reaction to Israel's renewed bombing of Gaza, Houthi militants in Yemen claimed that they fired a hypersonic missile at Israel before dawn this morning. We here in Tel Aviv were jolted awake at about 4 a.m. This was the second Houthi missile directed here in 3 days, and this new attempt targeted Ben Gurion International Airport just south of Tel Aviv. The Houthis also claim that they targeted the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier strike group right now in the Red Sea. Also overnight, the U.S. struck targets in Yemen's capital of Sana'a. That's according to Houthi-run TV. At least 9 women and children were wounded in one residential neighborhood. That's according to the Houthi-run health ministry. U.S. Central Command says operations are still continuing 24/7 after the Houthis started to target Israeli ships in the Red Sea. Back to you.
All right, Ramey, thank you very much. It may be the first day of spring, but it still feels like winter in the Midwest. A powerful winter storm dumped heavy, wet snow, and strong winds caused multiple accidents on major roads. And in northern Indiana, severe wind uprooted trees, toppling them into houses and businesses, and a possible tornado peeled the roof off an elementary school in Gary, Indiana, damaging the gym and several classrooms. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez is joining me live now from Highland, Indiana, where the worst of it may be out of the way. But wow, Nicole, look at that tree behind you.
Yeah, Vlad, you can only imagine what it was like for the family who lives inside the home here. We're essentially almost crushed by the weight of it as those winds toppled a tree that has been sitting here for at least the last 50 years. And check it out now, not only sent it crashing down, but it was literally uprooted. I mean, you can notice that these are now standing taller than I am here. A mother and her son were inside at the time taking shelter from those severe thunderstorms. Her son was in the basement. She was on the first floor, and that tree has now torn off part of a roof to one of their bedrooms. So, of course, they're not sleeping here now. They are staying elsewhere while they wait for their insurance company to tell them what their next steps should be and how soon they can start to cut this tree down and start to make repairs. But this is just an example of some of the damage we have seen all across the Midwest for over the last 24 hours, as we saw a nasty swath of weather from central Illinois push further east into parts of northwestern Indiana.
It just is remarkable, and we can see how climate conditions have eroded to the point where we see weather situations like this, Nicole. That tree is probably, I mean, I can't, it's got to be over 100 years old, having lived through many, many such weather events, and this is the one that uprooted it. And we're also getting more footage of the destruction just across the entire state. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course, we've heard of damage to nearby schools and other homes. And I think right now a lot of people are just sort of reminding themselves that we are now in the spring season, even though we had a lovely fresh layer of snowfall this morning. So it's a bit of a shock to some and a lot of cleanup for others ahead.
All right, Nicole Valdez for us this morning in Highland, Indiana. Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with the first look at the national forecast. Hi, Tammy.
Well, hello there, Vlad. You know what? We call this season Sprinter. March is a big transitional month, and there's a reason for calling it Sprinter. Take a look at this. This is what she was just talking about. Look at the severe weather that's moving through Chicago and into Indianapolis. That was last night, tornado warnings and all. And now on the backside, winter weather advisories for snow, 1 to 3 inches of snow, all in less than 24 hours. So kind of a crazy setup that we have seen going on. Let's take a look at the snow that has kind of built up as we go through this entire thing. We are looking at snow that has accumulated in places that, hey, should not be looking at snow in the spring. Look at the swath right at my feet. That is the fresh swath from the plains on up into the upper Midwest. There are no mountains there. That is the system that came in yesterday. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at what is on the way because, yeah, we're not done with this, not by a long shot. We're looking at a system that's going to bring rain and a few storms to the East Coast by tonight, and another system will be coming onshore in the Pacific Northwest by tonight as well. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. A Georgetown University researcher is the latest person to be caught up in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown on college campuses. Coming up, why DHS deems him deportable and how the university is responding. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Got some breaking details about that Delta plane that flipped over during that landing at Toronto International Airport in mid-February. You'll remember that although the plane flipped over, everyone survived. Canadian transportation officials have just released a preliminary report and this video to go along with it.
During touchdown, several things occurred. The side stay attached to the aircraft's right main landing gear fractured, the landing gear retracted, and the wing root fractured between the landing gear and the fuselage. which is the central body portion of the aircraft. The right wing detached from the fuselage, releasing a cloud of jet fuel, which caught fire while the aircraft began to slide along the runway.
Investigators say there are a lot of questions still to answer about this accident. Of course, we'll have much more on the report with former NTSB Administrator Robert Sumwalt in the next hour. Meanwhile, new data from the National Association of Realtors shows home sales jumped 4.2% month over month, but they all fell a little more than 1% compared to the same time last year. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady is here in Studio 55 and joins me to talk about it. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right, so how is this? Is this a reaction to the tariffs, or is this something altogether different?
You know, I think it's altogether a little bit different. We have seen mortgage rates come down the past few weeks, which is, I think, what people have a little bit been waiting for. You know, I think everyone's kind of in the same boat of we're probably not going to get back to that 3%. So if you're on the sidelines, just jump in. Mm-hmm. The thing that really stood out to me, though, is there's only a 3.5 month supply of available houses, and typically a 5 to 6 month is considered stable for the housing market. And it's been like this for a while. I mean, we've talked about this before, that there just isn't enough supplied and there aren't enough homes being built. And so you mentioned tariffs. That's where I think things get tricky, because when you have lumber costing more, aluminum, steel, all of these building materials costing more, that is going to be tough if you need to build more homes quickly.
All right, so you just came back from Washington, D.C. You were at that press conference with Fed Chair Jerome Powell yesterday. You asked him a question related to how consumers are feeling about the price of everyday goods. What did he tell you?
Well, he told me that, hey, this is because prices were high for so long and inflation was high for so long, and that people are really feeling the fact that prices going back to summer of 2022 were rising at 9%. Remember, that was the inflation rate. And he said, look, the economy is good, but I understand people are feeling it. It was sort of a wait and see. I think, you know, it feeds into consumer sentiment, though. Someone who's looking at their grocery bill and looking at their credit card statement and looking at the possibility of tariffs and how that's going to impact them, they're not saying, oh, well, that was the data from before. They're just putting it all together and feeling like this is just piling on right now.
So the president of the United States had some words about it. What did he say, and what does he think the Fed should be doing?
He thinks the Fed should be cutting rates. He said, quote, do the right thing in a Truth Social post last night. And this is interesting because the White House and the Fed, they are supposed to be separate, but the president has indicated a desire to talk about interest rates. And look, Chair Powell was asked about whether President Trump and the White House would influence him in any way in that press conference, even before this post on Truth Social. And he said no, and there was laughter in the room. So I think you're going to see a lot more of this back and forth. But you know what? I just wanted to hit on one thing that I thought was interesting, because you and I have talked about this question of inflation and growth.
Yep.
The Fed is still expecting to cut interest rates by
That was going to be my follow-up.
Okay, all right, sorry.
Yeah. So they're still, you think that they're going to cut?
So that's what their projections said, that they're going to still cut 2 times this year, yet their own projections show that inflation is supposed to be higher than they were initially expecting. And so I asked Chair Powell, I said, why are you doing this? Does that mean you are concerned about economic growth? And all of this consumer sentiment leading to less spending? And he didn't really answer the question. He said, oh, it's so uncertain. But yeah, that was initially my take. Oh, wow. So if you think inflation,
they're still thinking on, they're still planning on those 2 cuts.
I mean, obviously this changes all the time, right? But I was very surprised to see that.
Wow, really fascinating. It's good to have you back in New York, Kelly. Thank you very much. Appreciate it as always. All right, March Madness, did you fill out your bracket, Kelly?
I didn't.
Do you have a pick?
St. John's.
You just saw Nate Burleson's interview. That's why you said that. March Madness is officially here, folks. The first round of the men's basketball tournament tips off around noon today, and it all leads up to the national championship game in San Antonio on April 7th. CBS News Miami reporter Samantha Rivera has a preview of today's games.
I'm Samantha Rivera from CBS Center Court. So let's take a look at part of the NCAA tournament field for later today. 2 of the top seeds playing: the Auburn Tigers, of course, the #1 overall seed, and the Houston Cougars. The Cougars will have to contend with the Cinderella in Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, as the 16th seed. Now, they will face the Big 12 champs Houston in their first year in the Big 12, by the way, over in Wichita, Kansas. Coach Sampson always has his guys ready. Now, as for the top seed, Auburn playing in Lexington, Kentucky, and will take on the 16 seed Alabama State. After the Hornets, of course, won a thriller on Tuesday in their play-in game. That was a fun one to watch. Okay, now here's another game I want y'all to look out for here, okay? That could very well be a bracket buster. The 12-seeded Tritons from UC San Diego tip off later tonight in Denver, playing against the Wolverines, the number 5 seed. Michigan. So this is going to be an interesting one to watch. I know not a lot of people have UC San Diego going very far. I personally have them going to the Final Four. This is their first year of Division I eligibility in their postseason. So I don't know. It's a crazy month where anything could happen. Okay, so got to watch out for that one. But that'll do it for us here from CBS Center Court. We'll throw it back to you.
All right, Samantha. Thank you very much. A new search for Malaysian flight MH370 is set to begin. What we know about the renewed effort to solve that mystery. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following. Prosecutors in the Idaho student murders case plan to introduce this selfie of suspect Brian Kohberger as new evidence. They say he took it about 6 hours after the 2022 murders. One of the surviving roommates described seeing a man with bushy eyebrows inside the house that night. The jury will have to decide whether Kohberger matches the description. The trial is scheduled for August. The last person known to see missing college student Sudiksha Konaki is back on American soil. This morning, a judge allowed 22-year-old Joshua Ribby to leave the island. He formally declared Ribby a witness and not a suspect in Konaki's disappearance. He previously told authorities he and Konaki were swept up by a large wave and struggled in the water. Malaysia's government has given the green light for a new search for missing plane MH370. A Texas-based marine robotics company is going to scour more than 5,000 square miles of the Indian Ocean. It has been a decade, more than a decade, since the Boeing 777 plane with 239 people on board vanished from the radar after taking off from Malaysia's capital. It remains one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries. The White House described President Trump's conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday as, quote, fantastic. But there are still a number of differences between Washington, Moscow, and Kyiv following Trump's calls this week. Just moments ago, Zelensky gave a press conference in Norway where he was asked about the American proposals. Let's watch coverage from the BBC.
We want to end the war. So who will argue with that? Let's then make certain steps faster. And during the meeting in Jeddah, American party made a leap forward, rapid step forward, and they said, let's speak not about the partial ceasefire, but about the full ceasefire. We reacted immediately right at that meeting. We reacted. My team reached out to me because that was the change of agenda with which they arrived there. And I said immediately, we approve. We confirm we want to move to the end of the war. Yes. And everybody was very happy. And
I want to bring in Nina Khrushcheva. She is a professor at the Julian J. Studley Graduate Program of International Affairs at the New School, and she also happens to be the great-granddaughter of former leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor, as always.
Thank you.
So political leaders can say all they want, but these negotiations will be handled by technical teams to work through the details. How difficult of a challenge will that be?
Well, we're already seeing that it's a very difficult challenge because Donald Trump seems to be mediator between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. And so far it's going slow. Somebody agrees on something and somebody else doesn't agree. So now they have technical teams. Technical teams can decide on certain articles of those agreements, but then these articles of those agreements still go back to the top guys. And the top guys may still say, well, but why didn't you consider this and something else? And so far it's going slower. And even if the ceasefire seems to be closer to what it was, say, 2 weeks ago, it's still far away from being closed. And also, we do know that both sides keep shooting at each other, never mind that they already agreed that that at least the infrastructure, the electric and gas and other crucial infrastructure should not be part of the should be part of the ceasefire. So far we're still in the process of moving, but the end is no, at least the way it looks today. We really do not know when the ceasefire, and if it does, when it does come.
So certainly President Trump should be applauded for at least getting these two leaders to the negotiating table, to at least getting to a point where there is communication between Moscow and Washington, and there is some movement. But I wonder, when I hear partial ceasefire, then I see what Vladimir Putin is demanding, which is essentially that the United States stop supplying arms to Ukraine, that Ukraine stand down its military, that they do not entertain ever the idea of entering NATO. Then I wonder to myself, well, what is Vladimir Putin giving up? What's your analysis of it?
Vladimir Putin is giving up not going further, potentially. And I think that NATO membership is kind of a really interesting question here, because behind the closed doors, NATO member countries almost all agree that Ukraine potentially would never become part of NATO. I mean, we don't know, because who knows what's going to happen in 20, 50, whatever, 100 years. But so far, they all agree on that. And yet there's sort of a story that, no, Ukraine needs to decide. So that hypocrisy, in fact, does help Putin, because he says, well, you're hypocrites. Why are you then pushing? So it means that you're pushing for the war. So that's basically a no-starter. For Putin to give up, he can, and he already says that. He said it a couple of months ago, is that, for example, the two are the very main cities that the Russians want to get. It's Odessa and Kharkiv. These are the cities that now under the control of Ukraine and should stay, though. So Putin is basically saying, I am staying with wherever we have today, but then what we have to discuss is that Odessa and Kharkiv are not going to be part of kind of Russian advances. So he thinks he gives quite a lot. That is, he can continue to go further. It's going to be a long war, a war of attrition, which Russia is likely to win, because Ukraine doesn't have the power unless Europe gets into that war completely. Or he would say, well, now, and Ukraine gets what is left of Ukraine, is not going to become NATO, and that's your decision to make. So he thinks he's in quite strong position to make this demand that, of course, for Ukrainians seemed like an improbable proposition.
So, all right, Professor. So let's look at it from that standpoint, which is that the Ukrainians, despite consternations, will have to agree that whatever territory was lost during Putin's incursion and invasion is lost forever, at least as long as Vladimir Putin is the leader of Russia. And so the only question then would be, what would prevent, and Vladimir Putin agrees to it, but what would then prevent Putin from doing this again, and maybe not to Ukraine, but to another country on his flank? That's, I think, the biggest question for just those of us here in the United States, and I'm sure Europe as well. Fine, Ukraine has to, sort of suck it up and agree that those territories are gone. But what guarantees do they and other Eastern European states have that Vladimir Putin won't do this again, given that he will have won what territory that he took, which was during an illegal war?
That's a fantastic question, which we do not have an answer to. I am almost certain that Vladimir Putin doesn't have an answer to it, because he would say for now that, okay, fine, we technically won this war. I got as far as I could have gotten, and I'm going to stop. It is a question that nobody has an answer, and maybe, as I said, maybe even himself, because it will depend on further developments of diplomatic or any other relations, is that, what if in a year he would say, well, Moldova doesn't sit well, so I think I'm just going to go and make sure that Romania is not taking Moldova over, or something like that. But this question is very important, but since nobody has an answer to it, it should not really prevent any diplomatic efforts that people are trying to make today.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, which is that I certainly thought that, for example, Putin may have designs on Moldova, but the way that he would approach it would be by suggesting that Romania is somehow a threat to Moldova and that the Russians are going to protect the Moldovans from the West and from Romanian or European aggression. I guess the only question then becomes, is it fair or unfair to use a historical antecedent, which is Adolf Hitler's incursions into the Sudetenland and into Czechoslovakia, and being able to do that, and then the understanding from the European powers being, okay, that's it, but that really wasn't it, as we all know. Is it fair to say that there's similar antecedents or not fair?
Well, people make this connection quite often, and it's, in fact, very popular to do that. I am very careful using history as a kind of explanation for current events, because I think that when we start directly comparing past to the present, we sort of we limit ourselves with the contemporary analysis, because we think, well, because it happened in 1939, it must be happening in 2025. Maybe yes, maybe no. But once again, what's the policy? So fine, you compare, you think it was the cases. What is your policy? I'm sure you've covered already this. Kaja Kallas, the European Union diplomatic secretary, suggested that the 40 billions that Ukraine is going to get for European Union, guess what? Now it's, I think, 8 times less. I think it's 5 billion to now. These are all the countries that are screaming that Ukraine needs to be helped. So you're screaming or you're doing. And so once again, where is the policy? And when the policy is going to start matching the screaming words of this bellicose rhetoric, we cannot let Putin win. While it's happening, Putin thinks, you know what? You're all full of hubris. You're hypocrites because you're not doing what you say you're doing. And in this way, he is winning.
Fantastic analysis as always. Nina Khrushcheva, always great to have you. Please come back and talk with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to this. The environmental group Greenpeace will have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in damages to an energy company. A jury found the group liable for defamation against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Here to break down the details of this case is CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter. So, David, for an audience who may not at all be familiar with what the story is all about, explain what happened and what the jury found.
Hey, Vlad. So this goes back to 2016, 2017. This company, Energy Transfer, one of the largest pipeline companies in the world, they are putting a pipeline next to the Standing Rock Indian Reservation in North Dakota. And it drew a tremendous amount of protesters. It got violent. There were thousands of people that had camped out there, and it delayed the building of this pipeline, which was eventually built. After that, Energy Transfer sued Greenpeace for defamation and trespass and nuisances, saying that they had sort of fomented these protests at the Standing Rock Indian Reservation and had slowed down the company and had cost it money. And so this was really it was a very intense battle between these two entities, and with Energy Transfer making that claim, and then Greenpeace saying, you're really trying to put us out of business. You're not saying that we impeded your business. You're saying you want to silence us as a critic of the energy industry.
So critics argue that this ruling dealt a big blow to the precedent of free speech. Break that down for us and some of the other concerns.
Right. So I have a statement from Greenpeace which kind of hits at that. They say this is not the end of the chapter. They're going to appeal. The Energy Transfer knows we don't have $660 million. They want our silence, not our money. Greenpeace has like a $30 million operating budget. So to ask for $30 million in damages would essentially put Greenpeace out of business. They will, of course, appeal this. On the other hand, you have Energy Transfer, which had something like $84 billion in revenue last year. So while this case was sort of positioned as sort of a business case, that the business of Energy Transfer had been injured, Greenpeace and groups like the ACLU and other civil liberties organizations are saying this is really a First Amendment case. This is a powerful company trying to silence its critics And in this round, in this state court in North Dakota, that's what the jury found, that that Energy Transfer had crossed the line.
Really fascinating. David Schechter for us this morning. Thanks, David. All right, let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with another look at the national forecast. Hey, Tammy.
Well, hello to you, Vlad. Yeah, we have a lot going on. Let's start off first and take a look at what you can expect out there for today. We are going to be looking at more snow and more rain. Rain moving onto the East Coast and then offshore by tonight. Another storm making its way onto the West Coast, and that'll bring some heavier snow to the Sierra, the Cascade, and the Intermountain West, and some fairly heavy rain into parts of Northern California. Then we actually focus on the severe component. Thankfully, today is going to be much quieter. We just have general thunderstorms up toward Montana, Idaho, parts of Washington. And then we have another area of general thunderstorms where that line of rain with embedded storms will make its way through the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic, stretching from about New York down into the Carolinas. So nothing that is going to be on the severe side for today. The thing we are keeping an eye on is because we've had so much wind that has gone on the backside of all these storms, we have wound up with a fire danger. Today, the fire danger is going to be in New Mexico and Texas, and then we're watching a fire danger into Florida where it has been exceptionally dry lately. So those are the areas we'll be watching as the winds whip up with these very, very dry conditions out there. Let's go ahead and talk about temperatures. Look at this, above average. We are talking about 13 degrees above average in Philadelphia. We're talking about temperatures up into the Dakotas that are going to be about 9 degrees above average. The same thing up into Minnesota. The cooler air you see across the south. Tomorrow, that's where a big warm-up starts. Look at this, 70s in Dallas, and we still hang on to warmer than average temperatures up into Philadelphia and across the northern plains. By the time that we get into our Saturday, look at the warmth across the south. We're talking about 15 degrees above average in Dallas. Vlad?
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. Check in with you a little bit later. A Georgetown researcher is the latest person caught in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown on college campuses. Details about the accusations next. A Georgetown University researcher has been detained by ICE over claims he was actively spreading Hamas propaganda and promoting anti-Semitism on social media. Bardar Khan Suri is the latest person caught up in the Trump administration's crackdown on who they call activists across college campuses. CBS News legal reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman joins me now in Studio 55 to walk us through those claims. So what is the Department of Homeland Security suggesting?
So as you said, they're claiming that this researcher was promoting Hamas propaganda and anti-Semitism on social media. They're also saying that he has a close connection to a senior advisor to Hamas. And on that basis, they're using the same law that's been used to detain the Palestinian activist from Colombia, Mahmoud Khalil. It's this obscure provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act that says that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has the right to deport non-citizens if he thinks that they are adverse to U.S. foreign policy interests. And on that basis, this researcher has now also been sent to Louisiana, where Mahmoud Khalil is also currently being detained.
So what does the record show? In other words, is what the state and the Department of Homeland Security alleging accurate?
So far, we don't have any evidence. Georgetown University has released a statement. They say that they're not aware of any illegal activity by this researcher. He's been here doing doctoral research on peace building in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vlad, and he is here on a valid student visa.
All right, so this has shades, of course, of the case of Mahmoud Khalil. I guess the question that I have is, the Department of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, are able to deem anybody who they see as even just simply protesting a war as someone who is somehow a threat to the United States and thus needs to be deported. So then it's sort of a slippery slope. Anybody can be designated in this fashion, even American citizens.
Absolutely, Vlad. And that's why people should be concerned about this and take it very seriously, because even if you don't agree with the rhetoric of Mahmoud Khalil, who was a leading figure in Colombia's protests, we don't know that much about this researcher. it's such a broad law, potentially, the way they could interpret it, that, international students on these campuses are now very scared. I know they're walking around with passports. They're worried about what could happen to them here, because who knows who else will be deemed as adverse to U.S. foreign policy interests under this law. And we're also going to see how the courts deal with this. Mahmoud Khalil's case is still going. Right now, it's all about the habeas petition to get him released, but we'll also ultimately see it reflect how the government is using this provision.
Wow. All right, Katrina Kaufman here in Studio 55, breaking it down for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
as always. Appreciate it. All right, stick around. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. A photographer in Boston just happened upon a couple during one of the most joyous moments of their lives, a proposal, but she didn't know who they were or how to find them, so she enlisted some help from the internet. And as CBS News Boston reporter Julie McDonald found out, it didn't take too long to solve the mystery.
It's gonna sound really cliche, but I just really love love. Like, I'm such a hopeless romantic.
When Boston photographer Becca Thompson noticed the look of love on Saturday, she couldn't help but capture it. She'd been taking photos in Beacon Hill, right near beautiful Acorn Street.
And I turned around and I saw him down on one knee and saw they didn't have a photographer. So I just decided to run over for a quick second. It was a picturesque moment. Thankfully, I had the right settings and the lighting was great.
A testament to her professionalism, Becca quickly turned back to her own clients. She didn't want to take time from their shoot, but that meant she couldn't connect with the newly engaged couple.
It's been in the works for a little while. I've had a ring since about Christmas.
Benjamin McCormick had pulled off the picture-perfect proposal, surprising his now bride-to-be Isabel Gerard.
His brother actually took a video, and in the background of the video you can actually hear a camera shutter.
Thanks to social media, it didn't take long to figure out to whom that shutter belonged.
The notification just started rolling in, and she ended up commenting on the TikTok and was like, oh my God, this is me.
After her stunning images gained views and likes and shares, Becca is pinching herself. Her followers have more than doubled, and she's already booked shoots with new clients.
It's very serendipitous. I texted my boyfriend earlier. I was like, this is the best day of my life, because doing photography full time has been a dream for me since I was a freshman in high school, and it just seems like this is pushing me further into it.
Her talents now the happy couple's treasure. 3 grateful strangers in a meant-to-be moment.
It's so special, and we know that we're going to treasure those photos forever, and we really couldn't be luckier that this happened.
Julie McDonald, WBZ News.
If you are having a problem finding your happy place these days, you are not alone, Ryan. You're not alone. In fact, the United States has hit a new low on the World Happiness Report. He's always surly. University of Oxford researchers compiled a list of 147 countries and ranked them based on how people rate their own happiness. And get this, the United States didn't even come in the top 10. We are 24th in the world. We're one spot lower than we were last year. The report found that the decline is largely due to political polarization, also young people feeling really as if things are really much more difficult than their parents' generation and their grandparents' generations. But the Nordic countries, they topped the list. Finland remaining the happiest nation in the world for the 8th year in a row. It was followed by Denmark, Iceland, Sweden, and then the Netherlands. Mexico and Costa Rica also ranked in the top 10 for the very first time, which is very, very cool. All wonderful places. I have cousins in Norway. In Denmark, they love being Danish. It's a wonderful place to visit. Finland's amazing.
Amsterdam's amazing.
Amsterdam's amazing. Come on, America. Let's bring it. Let's also bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with the last look at the national forecast. Tammy, 24th in the world. We're unhappy people.
Well, at least we're not last, right? You got to be happy where you are. I
Looking on the bright side. That's Philly for you.
Can be happy
Always
when
looking
you
on the
wake
bright
up.
side.
That's right. You know, you got to bring it. All right, let's go ahead quickly take a look at what's going to be going on where you live for today. We are talking about cooler temperatures in the Pacific Northwest with some rain. We move into the heartland. The nasty weather is gone, but cooler air has moved in and windy conditions. It is generally mild in the south and along the East Coast. Temperatures are pumping up. Back to you, Vlad.
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. That does it for me, folks. I'm happy. That's all that matters. After the break, Mugo Diwe is live from San Fran with all the news breaking from coast to coast.